She stood at the altar draped in ivory silk, her trembling fingers clutching a bouquet of pale roses, and he never once looked at her face. Dominic Ashmore, the Duke of Wrexham, spoke his vows to the air above her head, his voice deep and hollow. She felt the weight of every guest's pity pressing against her back. Her own name, Lady Catherine Harrow, sounded foreign on his tongue, as if he were reading a contract aloud. When the Archbishop pronounced them man and wife, the Duke turned sharply and walked down the aisle alone, leaving her to follow or stand there forever. She followed, of course she followed. She had no other choice. Her father, the Earl of Harrow, had gambled away their fortune and her future. This marriage had saved her family from ruin. She had arrived at Wrexham Park knowing the Duke did not love her, but she had foolishly believed that kindness might grow, that a quiet girl with a warm heart might soften a cold man. She was wrong. The wedding breakfast was a muted affair. She sat at the long table, hands folded in her lap, while her new husband spoke to his steward at the far end of the room. Not one guest approached her. The champagne tasted bitter. When she finally rose, hopping to catch her husband's eye, he turned his back and left the hall without a word. The silence that followed was a blade. That night in a chamber vast and unfamiliar, she waited. She brushed her hair until it gleamed, slipped into a lace-trimmed nightgown and sat at the edge of the bed. Hours passed. No one came. Eventually a maid appeared, face flushed with embarrassment, and whispered that His Grace had retired to his private study and would not be disturbed. Catherine lay alone beneath the silk canopy, staring at the shadows. She whispered into the darkness, "I am his wife, I am his wife." The words had no meaning. Weeks drifted by in a fog of cold courtesy. Every morning she came to breakfast, and every morning he was already gone, a folded newspaper the only sign he had been there. She tried to fill the empty days. She explored the park's endless corridors, memorizing the portraits of ancestors who looked down with painted indifference. She walked the gardens until her slippers grew damp, breathing in the scent of lavender and crushed mint. She learned the servants' names, asked about their families, and slowly earned small, tentative smiles. But whenever she attempted to bridge the distance with her husband, she met a wall of ice. Once, she gathered the courage to visit his study. She carried a tray of tea and scones she had helped Mrs. Finch, the cook, prepare. She knocked softly and entered. He sat behind a desk of dark oak, quill in hand, eyes never lifting. "Yes. I thought you might like some refreshment. Leave it on the sideboard." She set the tray down and lingered, her heart pounding. "Dominic, I wonder if we might take a walk together this afternoon. The roses are in full bloom." At last he looked up. His eyes were the color of a winter storm, gray and remote. "I have no time for walks, Catherine. Surely you can occupy yourself. You are mistress of this estate now. Act like it." He returned to his papers. She felt the dismissal like a slap. Hot shame crept up her throat, but she refused to let him see her cry. She curtsied, the gesture stiff and absurd, and left. In the hallway she pressed her palm against the cold stone wall and breathed until the sting subsided. Spring melted into summer. Catherine stopped knocking on his door. She began to notice things beyond her own loneliness. The tenants' cottages needed new thatching. The village school had only 3 books. The old herbalist, a woman named Agnes, was desperate for an apprentice. Catherine, who had spent her girlhood hidden in her father's library, now spent her days with ink-stained ledgers, calculating the cost of roof repairs and reordering supplies. She wrote to the Duke's man of business, quietly shifting funds from the household budget. She never asked permission. She simply acted. The villagers soon grew accustomed to the sight of the young Duchess walking the muddy lanes, a basket of medicines on her arm. She learned to blend poultices, soothe fevers, and listen. So many people simply needed someone to listen. In return, they gave her a place. They called her Our Lady in warm, gruff voices. It was the first time in years she had felt useful. At the manor, the Duke noticed nothing. He was often absent, riding to London or shutting himself away with endless correspondence. The meals they shared, when they shared them at all, were exercises in silence. She would look at him across the long table, searching for any crack in his composure. There was none. He was a fortress without windows. Then came the night of Lady Beatrice's dinner party. The Duke's cousin, a widow with a viper's tongue, had invited them to her nearby estate. Catherine dreaded it. She wore her finest gown, a deep green silk that brought out the copper in her hair. She had hoped Dominic might offer her his arm. He did not. At the table, surrounded by glittering strangers, Catherine felt her isolation harden into something visible. Lady Beatrice, seated at the hostess's place, smiled at her with feral sweetness. "Dear Catherine, that gown is simply charming. I do believe I wore something very similar 2 seasons ago. How resourceful of you to make it look so refreshed." Laughter rippled. Catherine's cheeks burned. She looked instinctively toward her husband, a silent plea for rescue. Dominic's face was carved marble. He lifted his wine glass and said nothing. The moment stretched into an eternity. Catherine forced her lips to curve. "Thank you, Lady Beatrice. I find true elegance never fades." Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that. After the fish course, she excused herself. She walked slowly, deliberately to the retiring room, locked the door, and pressed her forehead against the cool mirror. No tears came. She had none left. Instead, something quiet and final settled inside her, like a door closing softly but irrevocably. That night in the carriage, the darkness rattled between them. Dominic finally spoke. "You handled Beatrice well. She can be tiresome." Catherine turned her face to the window. "Yes, she can." She did not say another word. And for the first time, the Duke's brow creased with something that looked almost like unease. The turning point arrived without fanfare, wrapped in a simple request. A fortnight later, Catherine presented herself in his study. He looked up, faintly surprised. She had not sought him out in weeks. "Dominic, I have come to ask your permission to move to the East Wing." He set his quill down slowly. "Why?" "The chambers there are closer to the herb gardens where I work, and I believe we would both benefit from a greater degree of privacy." She said it gently, without accusation. That made it worse. He stared at her, searching. "You are my Duchess. Your place is here." "My place," she said, "is where I can be of most use. I am not useful to you here. I am only a shadow in a room you wish to be empty." The words hung between them. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something raw and quickly buried. But he did not argue. He gave a short, tight nod. "As you wish." Catherine curtsied and walked out. She did not look back. If she had, she would have seen the Duke's hand clench into a fist on the desk and the sudden pallor of his face. The days grew quieter. The East Wing was small and sunlit, with windows that opened onto a riot of rosemary and thyme. Catherine filled the rooms with books and drying herbs. She woke early, ate simply, and spent her afternoons in the village. She no longer waited for Dominic to notice her absence. She stopped hopping for footsteps in the corridor. And that was precisely when he began to notice. At first it was small things. The breakfast table felt cavernous without her quiet presence. The music room, which she had once filled with soft pianoforte melodies, now gathered dust. He found himself pausing outside the East Wing, listening for her voice, but she was rarely there. The servants spoke of her with open affection. His steward reported with cautious admiration that the Duchess had reduced household waste by a third and renegotiated contracts with the local merchants. She had done his job better than he had. A splinter of something unfamiliar lodged itself beneath the Duke's ribs. He tried to ignore it. He threw himself into estate affairs, rode his horse until both were lathered, and drank more brandy than he should. None of it worked. Then came the afternoon. He saw her in the garden with another man. He had been walking the upper gallery, restless and unaccountably irritable, when he glanced through the window. There she was, seated on the stone bench beside the fountain, her hair uncovered and gleaming in the sun. Beside her was Sir William Pemberton, a young baronet whose estate bordered his own. William was laughing, his head tilted toward her, and Catherine was smiling. It was not a polite, strained smile. It was a true smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of her eyes and made her whole face luminous. Dominic stopped breathing. He had never seen her smile like that. She had certainly never smiled at him like that. A hot, corrosive sensation flooded his chest. He gripped the windowsill until his knuckles whitened. Sir William reached out and lightly touched her hand. Catherine did not pull away. The Duke turned and strode from the gallery, his boots striking the floor like gunshots. He did not understand what was happening to him. He told himself it was pride, nothing more. The Duchess of Wrexham should not be so familiar with a neighbor. But that night, when he lay in the vast, empty bed, the image of her smile tormented him. And the name he whispered in the darkness was not William's. It was hers. A week later, he contrived to meet her in the library. She was perched on a ladder, reaching for a volume on medicinal botany, when she heard his voice. "Allow me." She looked down. He stood at the foot of the ladder, his expression unreadable. She handed him the book and descended carefully. "Thank you." He did not step back. She was suddenly aware of how close he stood, of the scent of sandalwood and leather that clung to him. "You spend much time with Sir William," he said. She met his gaze evenly. "He is a kind man. He treats me with respect." The words landed with surgical precision. Dominic flinched, "And I do not." Catherine considered the question with a calm that astonished even herself. "You have never been cruel," she said, "but you have also never been present. I have learned to build a life without you, Dominic. I think, in truth, you wanted it that way." He opened his mouth, but no sound came. She stepped past him and left the room. He stood alone among the books, a man who had just been handed a mirror and could not bear his own reflection. That night the Duke did something he had not done in years. He walked to the east wing. The corridor was dark, but a sliver of light showed beneath her door. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. What could he say? "I have noticed your absence. I cannot sleep. I think of your smile and it burns me." The words were there, but his throat had never learned how to speak them. So he turned away. But on the table outside her door he left a single white rose, thorns carefully removed, wrapped in a velvet ribbon. The next morning Catherine found it. She lifted it, puzzled, and looked down the empty corridor. There was no note. She assumed it was a thoughtful gesture from William and tucked it into a bud vase on her windowsill. She did not mention it to the Duke. The gifts continued. A leather-bound journal appeared on her desk. A pot of rare chamomile, the kind she had once mentioned in passing, sat on the greenhouse bench. Each time Catherine felt a flutter of confusion. William never spoke of them, but she did not press him. Gratitude was a delicate thing. And so she went on, oblivious, while the Duke watched from a distance, each anonymous offering a silent confession he was too proud to voice. Summer deepened. One evening, Catherine returned from the village to find Dominic waiting in the entrance hall. His cravat was loosened, his hair disheveled. He looked as though he had been packing. "Catherine," his voice was hoarse, "we must speak." She removed her bonnet unhurried. "Very well." He led her to the small parlor where a fire crackled despite the warmth. He did not sit. "I have been a fool," he said. She waited. "I thought that keeping my distance would protect us both. I thought that if I never let myself feel, I could not destroy anyone." He dragged a hand through his hair. "My mother died of a broken heart. My father neglected her for years, flaunted his mistresses, and she simply faded. I swore I would never love. I thought love was a weakness that killed." Catherine's heart clenched, but she remained still. "And what do you think now?" "I think," he said, his voice cracking, "that I have been more alone than I ever imagined possible, and it is my own doing." She saw it then, the naked pain behind the ice. He was not a fortress. He was a man terrified of the very thing he most needed. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. He crossed the room and knelt before her. The Duke of Wrexham on his knees, his head bowed. "Because I cannot bear your silence another day. Because I have watched you grow strong and radiant, and I have done nothing but watch. Because Sir William looks at you as if you hung the moon, and I want to tear the stars down because I cannot bear it." Catherine's breath caught. She had never imagined such words from him. Dominic. "I know I have no right," he continued, raw and unguarded. "I have given you nothing but neglect. But I am begging you, Catherine. Give me one chance to prove that the man you married still exists beneath all this ice." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She had not cried in months. She did not know if she could trust him, but the sight of him, broken and humbled, cracked something open inside her. "What of my heart?" she asked. "I gave it to you on our wedding day, and you never claimed it. How do I know you will not wound me again?" He took her hands, his fingers trembling. "I cannot promise I will not make mistakes, but I can promise this: I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you, if you will let me." The fire crackled. A clock ticked somewhere deep in the house. Catherine looked into his eyes and saw, for the first time, not the cold Duke, but a man terrified of losing her. "I need time," she said at last. "My trust is not easily rebuilt." "I will wait," he said. "I will wait forever." The days that followed were strange and tender. Dominic did not crowd her. He left her space, but each morning a fresh rose waited on her breakfast tray. He invited her to walk with him, not demanding, simply offering. Slowly she began to accept. They talked, for the first time truly talked, about his mother, about her lonely childhood, about the fears they had both carried like stones in their pockets. One afternoon she led him to the village school she had helped rebuild. He stood in the doorway, watching her kneel beside a small girl with ink-stained fingers, and something shifted permanently in his chest. That night he said to her, "You have given this estate a soul. I only built walls." She touched his cheek. "Walls can be taken down." It was not a single moment of healing. It was 1,000 tiny stitches, a shared laugh over a burnt tea cake, a quiet evening reading by the fire, her head eventually resting on his shoulder, a morning when he found her weeping over a letter from her father, and he held her without asking why. And then, on an evening when the air was heavy with the scent of jasmine, he took her to the rose garden, the same garden where she had once seen him only at a distance. This time, he did not let go of her hand. He stopped beneath an archway of white blossoms and turned to her. "I have a confession," he said. She tilted her head, curious. "The journal, the chamomile, the roses outside your door. It was never Sir William. It was always me. I was too much a coward to sign my name." Her lips parted in shock. "You. Every gift was a prayer you would look at me, the way you looked at him." Catherine laughed, a sound of pure, unguarded joy. "Dominic Ashmore, you impossible man." She framed his face with her hands. "All this time you were wooing me in secret." "Desperately," he admitted, "and there was no ice left, only fire. I loved you too late, but I love you with everything I am." She pulled him down and kissed him, there among the roses, and the last of the walls crumbled into dust. In the months that followed, the household learned a new rhythm. Breakfast was no longer silent. The East Wing remained Catherine's sanctuary, but Dominic often joined her there, reading while she sorted herbs. The villagers marveled at the change in their Duke. He funded the school entirely, walked the lanes with his wife on market days, and once, to the astonishment of all, helped an elderly tenant repair his fence. And on the anniversary of their wedding, in the small stone chapel where they had stood a year before, Dominic took Catherine's hands before the very altar and spoke new vows. Vows he had written himself, trembling as he read them. "I promise to see you," he said, "to hear you, to never let you feel invisible again. You are not my duty, Catherine, you are my heart." She wept. So did half the congregation. Even Lady Beatrice, seated at the back, dabbed at her eyes, though she would later deny it. That night, as they walked home under a sky thick with stars, Catherine leaned against his shoulder. "I never thought I would be this happy," she murmured. Dominic pressed a kiss to her hair. "Nor I, but you taught me something, my love." "What is that?" that the bravest thing a person can do is not close their heart, but open it. She smiled up at him, and in her eyes he saw his whole world, the world he had almost lost, the world he would spend the rest of his life cherishing. And in the silence of the warm night, their laughter rose, mingling with the scent of roses and the distant song of a nightingale, a melody of healing, finally complete.